a cell phone in your face. If you ask a question, they'll surround you with cameras. They'll scream at you. They'll try to get you to commit violence. I believe God is giving us a little bit of a glimpse into what life without him would be like.
A Disciple's View with Todd Herman. Critical information from a faith-enriching perspective. Weekdays at noon Central on AFR.
This is American Family Radio, a listener-supported ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. Voters are heading to the polls in California and Iowa today. Alex Hogan from Washington has more on the state primaries.
In California's governor's race, candidates include Democrats Javier Becerra and Tom Steyer and Republican Steve Hilton. The top two finishers, regardless of the party, move on to the November general election. And Los Angeles' mayoral race is heating up between Spencer Pratt, Nithya Raman, and Karen Bass. It's a tight race. Support. If any candidate receives over 50% of the vote, they will win the vote outright. If not, the two candidates with the most votes will move on to the November runoff. Moving to Iowa now, where State Representative Josh Turek and State Senator Zach Walz are competing in the Democratic primary for the U.S. Senate seat being vacated by incumbent Republican Joni Ernst.
And it's primary day in places other than California.
New Jersey Democratic U.S. Senator Cory Booker is up for re-election this year. He's already renominated, but 4 Republicans in New Jersey are holding a primary today to be the one to challenge him in the fall. New Mexico Democratic U.S. Senator Ben Ray Lujan is up for re-election and is facing a primary challenge. New Mexico Governor Democrat Michelle Lujan Grisham is term limited, and a primary is underway. South Dakota Republican incumbent U.S. Senator Mike Rounds is facing a primary challenger, and the state's governor, Republican Larry Roden, who assumed office after Kristi Noem resigned to become DHS secretary, is also participating in a primary today. Eben Brown, Fox News.
Americans are becoming more frustrated as the war in Iran drags on, with promises of a deal and then more delays. Matthew Whitaker is the U.S. ambassador to NATO.
What I would say on the Iran-U.S. conflict is we will defend our interests. Obviously, the president is the negotiator in chief. He has negotiated an agreement that is, that he wants, and he's focused on the final details to make sure that among the most important things that Iran doesn't ever have a nuclear weapon.
2 members of President Trump's cabinet will appear before congressional committees today. Jessica Rosenthal has more.
Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullin is expected to testify before the Senate Appropriations Committee as Republicans still grapple with separate funding for part of his department to include ICE and CBP. There will also likely be questions about delays in FEMA reimbursements. Monday, Mullin addressed recent fights between protesters, ICE agents, and state police outside the Delaney Hall ICE detention facility in New Jersey.
These were individuals that were well organized. We've arrested individuals that came in from Portland. We've seen that they've been well supplied. We've seen Antifa flags being flown.
Separately, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is expected to testify about the State Department budget before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
And finally, in Oregon, a ballot initiative this November would ban hunting and fishing.
According to Axios Portland, the outdoor recreation industry generated $8.4 billion in Oregon's economy in 2023. A big part of that was the hunting and fishing scene. Places like the Columbia River and the Cascade foothills drive outdoorsmen to the state for such activities. However, now a ballot initiative with 120,000 signatures is threatening the hunting and fishing scene in the state by seeking to make participating in such activities a criminal offense. David Michelson is the IP28 campaign leader, and he says that the group wants people to shift away from killing animals and start treating all wildlife the same as they treat their companion animals, such as their dog or cat. On Fox News, Oregon Democratic State Senator Anthony Broadman says that he hasn't seen much support for the proposed ballot initiative.
I personally haven't met anybody who supports this. In fact, when people hear what the ballot initiative is actually going to do, they're pretty shocked.
He also said that supporting Oregon's hunting and fishing industry is a bipartisan issue and said that he'd rather be focusing on other things such as education or public safety. However, he did say that it is the beauty of public process to look at all issues, even the poor ones. Senator Broadman also brought up the fact that hunting and fishing licenses are ways the state already helps the local animal species.
There's so many things wrong with limiting hunting and fishing, which at the end of the day, hunting and fishing licenses are one of the ways that we do some of the incredible habitat restoration work for game and non-game species here in Oregon.
The 120,000 signatures means that the proposed bill will make it onto the Oregon ballot in November. I'm Caleb Castile.
For American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh.
Blue Mountain Christian University offers a fully online RN to BSN degree for registered nurses. This cohort-based program is designed for working nurses and can be completed in as little as 1 year or part-time over 2 years. RN to BSN students are admitted each fall, and coursework is delivered online with instruction grounded in a Christian worldview. Learn more about the RN to BSN online degree at bmc.edu.
Jenna Ellis in the morning on American Family Radio.
I love talking about the things of God because of truth and the biblical worldview. The U.S. Constitution obligates our government to preserve and protect the rights that our founders recognize come from God, our Creator, not our government. I believe that Scripture in the Bible is very clear that God is the one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time.
This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Good morning. It is Tuesday, June 2nd, and you may have heard about this headline that in the midst of all of the political news and, kind of the emphasis on the midterms and Iran and, all those things that, of course, we're going to get to, we need to be focused on what's actually going on around our planet and in the environment because this is the headline, and this is coming from The Hill. Google wants to release up to 32 million quote-unquote good mosquitoes in California and Florida. So this is coming from KTLA. When you think of Google debugging something, you probably think of software, not actual bugs. Yet the tech giant is seeking approval from the federal government, specifically the EPA, to release up to 32 million mosquitoes in California and Florida as part of its quote-unquote debug program. The little-known program, but it's actually gotten a lot of attention now, especially across social media, aims to stop bad bugs with good bugs by releasing millions of sterile mosquitoes to eliminate those that carry disease. So mosquitoes are the deadliest animal in the world, according to the CDC. Over 3,500 species of mosquitoes, and one alone carries the Zika virus. You've heard of some other of those, which is against hundreds of millions of people per year. Google Debug says on its project homepage that this is a difficult problem to solve, and explaining that most diseases carried by mosquitoes don't have effective vaccines or treatments. So attacking mosquitoes with pesticides is unsustainable because they're becoming less effective over time and can be toxic to people. And clearing standing water is not enough because people can never find all the places that mosquitoes breed. So we need a new approach, Google concludes. Well, I have a lot of questions about this. So let's welcome in a raw egg nationalist, our friend Charles Cornish Dale. You can follow him on X, and he is a prolific author, nutritionist, and I would say environmentalist. But Raw Egg, thanks for joining on this topic. And it's gotten a lot of widespread attention, I think, as it should, online, because people are first and foremost concerned about why Google, out of all companies and people and programs, why Google is interested in solving this particular problem. It doesn't really seem like that is within its purview. So what exactly is going on?
It's good to be back with you, Jenna. Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think that there's anybody on the planet who likes mosquitoes. I mean, I made the mistake of falling asleep outside the other night. I've got a bed outside by my summer house, and I fell asleep, and I woke up, and I'd been absolutely savaged by mosquitoes. I mean, they're horrible creatures. We all hate them. But yeah, you're right. The question is, well, why is Google doing this? What's Google's stake in this? Because of course, I think it's well established enough by now that Google isn't some sort of benevolent company that does things for the good of humanity. It does things, like all corporations, for its bottom line and for its shareholders. So, yeah, it's kind of puzzling. And I mean, I've puzzled over the fact that this is happening in Florida and California. I mean, there are mosquito-borne diseases in Florida and California. There are. but there are very, very few cases of them each year. I mean, we're talking a vanishingly small number. People don't really die of mosquito-borne diseases in Florida and California. So it doesn't really make a great deal of sense. And I mean, there's been a lot of focus recently on tick-borne diseases, and I think, and especially, this alpha gal allergy, which makes people allergic to meat if they end up getting bitten by a tick. And it's spreading across America really, really fast. Thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people in the US may now be allergic to meat because they've been bitten by a tick. I mean, I think if you want to focus on a critter, on a very, very unpleasant insect, you would be much better off focusing on ways to reduce the reproduction and the spread of ticks across the US. That's a bigger problem. So I find it puzzling, actually, from a number of different directions.
Yeah, and it's a good point that this is a problem that does need a better solution. And RFK Jr., of course, the HH secretary, has been talking recently about the problem of ticks that are becoming more widespread and Lyme disease. And there have been several doctors that have been going on, various news programs talking about how Pfizer has the vaccine for Lyme disease now that supposedly is safe and effective. And we've all heard that before. So I think there's a lot of skepticism about some of these kind of newer solutions. Maybe that's a good thing. But the problem of, some of these bug-borne illnesses, it still remains a problem. So the question is this actually a good solution? And I think the hesitation that people have is that they don't really trust a company like Google getting involved, rather than, maybe people still trust the CDC, but it just seems like it's coming kind of out of left field. And so do you think that there's any truth to the concern that maybe this is a pretext for something else that's maybe more nefarious? Because there are other conspiracies online as well that, some of these ticks that are perhaps being intentionally released, some say maybe by the government. So, I think there's a lot of just concern and, information across the spectrum, and people don't really know what's going on.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that, Jenna. I think there's a lot of rightful mistrust of the government, of the health authorities, and of big corporations like Google. And so when you get a situation like this, which seems largely inexplicable, and as I say, I don't know why Google is so interested in this, then yeah, people are going to speculate, and people are going to start triangulating and trying to draw their own conclusions about what's going on. The one thing I think that this mosquito plan has in its favor is that it doesn't involve genetic modification. It involves basically mosquitoes being infected with a virus that makes them sterile. But we don't know actually what the knock-on effects could potentially be of introducing this, sterilizing virus into the wider environment. I don't necessarily mean with regard to people, but I just mean with regard to the kind of broader web of animals within the ecosystem, other insects. Do we know, for example, that this sterilizing virus won't also sterilize other kinds of insects that we don't want to kill? So, I think we have to be very careful. And to talk to the point about ticks, then we do know, and it's well documented, that the US government has worked on weaponizing ticks and tick-borne diseases for decades, since at least the 1950s, in places like Plum Island, Lyme, Connecticut, which is where the very first cases of Lyme disease were documented, which has led a lot of people to believe that actually maybe, Lyme disease is the result of biological weapons research that then spilled over into the wider environment. And then you get other people who say, well, actually, these diseases are being deliberately introduced into the environment as well. It's hard it's hard to ignore the fact that you have these sort of social engineers, globalist types, people who are associated with the World Economic Forum, bioethicists, who talk about how, it would be a good thing if we made people allergic to meat. It would be a good thing if more people caught alpha-gal syndrome, because it would, mean that actually we could make an easier transition to a global plant-based diet. So there's all sorts of information, all sorts of kind of facts that are circulating around, and there is a huge amount of mistrust. And I think some of it is actually not misplaced. I think some of it is actually quite justified. And it would be nice to know, for example, why this is being done by Google and why not the CDC. If this is a public health imperative, if this is something that really needs to be done because mosquito-borne viruses are so bad in Florida and California, then why aren't health authorities doing this? Why is it Google?
Yeah, and that's really the main question that I've seen arise online, and is probably the main question that I have. And you're right that the skepticism overall isn't just because of the COVID era that was so recent, and we're all still in basically the aftermath of the total destruction of trust for the so-called health and medical experts. But I mean, this has gone back all the way to World War II and some of the biological warfare and some of the things that was going on then, and probably even further back than that. And so we always have to ask the question, is this actually a natural thing that is arising, or is this potentially manufactured? Is this just getting more attention in the media for fear-mongering purposes? I mean, there's all kinds of reasons. And, that leads me into actually the second headline that I wanted to ask you about as well, is this so-called, Ebola outbreak, which, this has just been contained within, I think it's 2 different countries now in Africa, and the reported cases remain low in the sense of what has happened in just the last few years. For Ebola, there have been no reported cases in the United States, according to the CDC. We all remember just a couple of weeks ago with the headlines that were, in my opinion, fear-mongering a little bit about the hantavirus, and that ultimately has been contained, and no one else besides anyone on that particular ship ended up actually contracting that disease. And so when the CDC, I think it has a responsibility to inform the public of, hey, this is a potential concern. But where's the line between reasonable public information versus the fear-mongering over a potential pandemic yet again?
Yes, I mean, I think there obviously is a line that should be drawn, and I think you're right to say that the hantavirus, I think, has turned out to be largely scaremongering. Media outlets in particular, social media, amplifying this idea that there is, we're on the cusp of yet another global pandemic. And look, the hantavirus isn't nice. Ebola isn't nice. Ebola is horrible. The Zaire strain of Ebola, I think, has a mortality rate of up to 90%. And this new outbreak, which I think is the Bundigbio strain, if that's how you pronounce it, has a lower mortality rate. But because it has a lower mortality rate, I think it's more transmissible and actually potentially, more deadly. But nevertheless, there aren't any clear signs that this is anything other than a regional outbreak that should be treated by health authorities in quite a circumspect manner. You can just prevent people from flying from the Congo and Uganda to outside Africa or even outside their countries. You don't need to drum up this fear. And the media obviously does have a part to play in this. I mean, people. It's a good way of generating clicks. It's a good way of generating traffic to your website or to your social media profile, and so people do engage in it. But I think, especially under RFK Jr., who was obviously a great skeptic and a great critic of the pandemic response, and I think the American health authorities do have a responsibility actually to maintain a measured approach, maintain measured messaging, and to keep people to keep people properly informed and not to let them get too carried away. But to go back to what we were saying about the insect diseases, about mosquitoes and ticks and whatever, there is a great deal of mistrust of the health authorities. And so as soon as you get the CDC saying, look, there's nothing to worry about, people begin to get worried about that, because of course they remember what happened during the coronavirus. They remember that the World Health Organization told people that there was absolutely nothing to worry about, that municipal authorities, the Boston mayor was telling people to go out at Chinese New Year and hug a Chinese person in the street, to show your solidarity, that coronavirus, COVID-19 was basically, didn't really amount to anything and there wasn't any risk. So there's all of this skepticism, all of this distrust, these layers of skepticism and mistrust and distrust that are very, very hard to cut through, actually. And I mean, public health authorities do have a difficult job now, I think, in really convincing people to trust them.
Yeah, and that's going to be the difficulty and the challenge between, Trump CDC, which now is led by Jay Bhattacharya, who has earned our trust, I think, through how he had advised Trump during the COVID era. But there is a difference, I think, in perception between the CDC, the World Health Organization, some of these, kind of entities that are responsible for the trust the science, kind of narrative, versus the trust and the cheering, frankly, that people have for RFK Jr. and the HHS. I mean, I find that disparity really interesting, that people are really encouraged by Kennedy and actually trust broadly his proposals and propositions and the Make America Healthy Again movement overall, even though now he's obviously part of the federal government, but they don't really trust the CDC or the WHO and some of the other organizations. Do you think that that's just more because it's RFK Jr. and that personality, and we tend to trust that figurehead versus necessarily the part of the federal government he's attached to?
I mean, yes, I do think that figureheads play a very important role. And, you could compare RFK Jr. to Anthony Fauci, for example, who was such a, I mean, RFK is a polarizing figure too, let's not forget. I mean, there are people now even people who might have supported him, Democrats, let's say leftists in particular, who might have supported him once upon a time now, who won't listen to him, everything that he says is a conspiracy theory, whether he's talking about raw milk or fluoridation or vaccines or the importance of eating animal foods, anything like that. It's all nonsense. It's woo woo. It's a conspiracy. He's got a brainworm, etc. So the role of figureheads, yes, I think is important. And for the people who trust RFK Jr., it is very much on the basis of the fact that he has been a tireless health campaigner for 30 plus years on all sorts of environmental and health issues. And so, yes, I mean that does play a big role. But it is important to remember that for all the people who trust RFK Jr., there are nevertheless equally as many people who look at him and just say, well, oh, he's a dangerous right-wing conspiracy theorist, and you should do the opposite of what he says.
Right, and it is difficult to get some cohesion, which really though is at the heart of the American way, which is to receive information but be able to determine what's best for ourselves and our families, which is why I was adamantly opposed from a moral and constitutional perspective to any sort of vaccine mandate during COVID, to say, the government is requiring you to inject yourself with this experimental medication. I mean, it's just bizarre. And that type of biological authority should never override individual liberty in terms of health and freedom. And in states like Florida have championed more health freedom. And unfortunately, the proposal that Governor DeSantis wanted, the Florida House, didn't take up this session. Hopefully that will come about in the next 2 years, but all states should have that. and at least there is, some now more of the federal issues on that. But we're already out of time, and I hear the music, but Right Nationalists, I really appreciate your perspective on this. And bottom line is that, there's so much information out there, and I think we need to be careful, both just blindly trusting and then also being led into fear by any headline that we come across, whether it's on an Ebola outbreak, it's on, these mosquitoes or whatever. I'm really looking forward to Lee Zeldin, the head of Trump's EPA, commenting. I haven't seen his comment on the situation yet. The EPA has had a time for public comment on the Google mosquitoes, so the EPA is looking at that. So we'll be following that story, but you can follow Right Nationalists on X, and we'll be right back with more.
Hey everybody, Walker Wildman here. We just got done filming here at Wall Builders Library in Aledo, Texas with Stephen McDowell, Tim Barton, Rick Green, and myself. Episode 9 of AFA at Home, One Nation Under God, celebrating America's 250th anniversary. That's our theme. That's our title and subtitle for this video session. Coming out very soon for you. Stay tuned on July 4th, 2026, on America's 250th birthday. We're going to release this video. It's jam-packed full of American history, why we're here, why our founding fathers did what they did, why they fought and died for our nation. Stay tuned. Make sure to check us out at stream.afa.net. Follow all of AFA's major social media platforms, and make sure you share this with family and friends.
The following is a real-life story from Trinity Debt Management.
When I was feeling the stress of too much credit card debt, I looked at two different options: debt settlement and debt management. They may sound the same, but guess what? They're not. Debt settlement seemed like a quick fix, but I found out it would destroy my credit, create tax headaches, and hit me with huge fees. They actually told me to stop paying my bills. No way, not me. Then I turned to a debt management plan developed by the team at Trinity. They worked with my creditors, lowered my payments, reduced my interest, saved me thousands, and paid off my debt. And Trinity is a Christian company, which is important to me.
If credit card debt has you down, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813.
My name is Heather. Please forget debt settlement and remember Trinity Debt Management.
1-800-788-1813.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Starnes. Stand by for news and commentary next. President Trump has jumped into the national debate over New York Giants quarterback Jackson Dart. Dart faced a firestorm of outrage from sports reporters and some of his teammates after he introduced President Trump at a rally. Dart has refused calls to apologize. The president publicly thanked Jackson, called him a winner. The president also noted that Dart was taking heat from radical left lunatics. You know, it's quite ironic that Jackson Dart is facing the wrath of his teammates simply for introducing a president. Harrison Butler of the Kansas City Chiefs saw the same outrage after he defended traditional marriage and family values. Tim Tebow was all but run out of the NFL because he took a knee to pray. But where was the outrage when the NFL not only defended but embraced athletes accused of all sorts of felonies, including assault? You know, it seems to me the NFL is more tolerant of players who sexually assault women than they are players who support the president or worship Jesus. I'm Todd Starnes.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. And the latest that is going on in Iran, apparently the leader of Iran submitted his resignation. That has been reported by several news outlets amid the ongoing negotiations with the United States. So what is the current status? Let's welcome in Scott Eulinger, who is a former intelligence agent. And where do we stand in all the negotiations, if there are any ongoing, with Iran?
Well, it is rather confusing, Jenna. Frankly, it's even hard for me to keep track of the constant announcements and counter announcements, and so it's very hard to sort what's going on. I guess we have to trust that President Trump has much more accurate and current information than we do. But I think with this apparently, like the Iranian president resigning, I think it indicates the schism that exists between the leadership of Iran, that the civilian government is at odds with the religious fanatics of the IRGC. But the problem is that doesn't really, recognizing that doesn't give us really the solution to the problem. I think maybe this is why President Trump has been unusually patient with waiting with the negotiating, because he's aware that the government is fragmented. But the problem is that he's giving them the benefit of the doubt, but I think at the same time, unfortunately, what's happening is he's kind of undermining his own position, because the more this goes on as it is right now, the more from the Iranian point of view, and I know because I've worked against them my entire CIA career, they sense weakness, and so they're going to move to exploit it.
Yeah, and so we also have Trey Yingst from Fox News saying as of yesterday that Iran has suspended all diplomatic communication and messages with the United States. According to Iranian state media, the decision was reportedly due to Iranian oppositions to Israeli strikes against Hezbollah. So, how does all of this, and then there's also a report from Axios that Trump was yelling at Netanyahu over the Lebanon bombing, talking, and I won't repeat his rhetoric with some expletives there, and that was reported by Axios. But how does this kind of triangular situation affect, perhaps, as you mentioned, Trump's patience? Because, Israel is playing such a large factor in this, and Trump, while he has a great relationship with Netanyahu and obviously Israel, doesn't directly control them.
Right. So So there's been this maybe Axios really can't be trusted, but there almost certainly is tension between the two leaders. But see, the problem is that again, because we've delayed so long, I think the Iranians have sensed weakness, and so what they have tried to do is to tie what's going on in Lebanon with what's going on in Iran. But the problem is that we have let them do that. And so, so last night was actually not, I don't think, very good news for Trump, because Trump spoke to Netanyahu, and that was fine. And he also apparently spoke to Hezbollah, like you can take those guys' word for anything. And then, of course, so that makes it sound like, okay, to try to kind of smooth things over with the Iranians. But then the problem is that like literally a few hours later, Hezbollah fired on Israel again. So in other words, it makes Trump look weak, because he called them and they said, we won't shoot. And then they shot a few hours later. So this further undermines the U.S. position. And so, and now with the talks of that the talks have been broken off, I mean, it seems it's something I don't really like to recommend, but basically he's got to start bombing again. He has to hit them. I mean, there have been a couple of attacks yesterday on some naval positions and some aircraft sites, but he needs to renew the bombing, because it's clear that the longer he waits, it seems like he's undermining his own position. And the Iranians definitely sense that. And so it really kind of makes me think like, really, this whole thing was kind of a mistake, I think, to stop the bombing for like the last 6 weeks. I was very pessimistic about this, or very suspicious about this, even 6 weeks ago. And unfortunately, I think I've proven to be correct.
Wow. Well, and that's quite a recommendation. And so, what would that do overall for any potential negotiations? That, I mean, is it just a show of force and basically forcing them to come back to the negotiating table and actually being serious about, and not, asking for ridiculous terms that the U.S. will never agree to, like being able to keep their uranium enrichment and, possibility of nuclear weapons? I mean, obviously the U.S. isn't going to agree to that.
But frankly, I think it's more a matter of eliminating everyone that you're dealing with, because these people are, they killed Americans in truck bombings in the early 80s, and they basically killed people for the last 30 years. So pretending or thinking that we can negotiate with these people is truly a mistake. And so I think that maybe the path to take is you literally have to, okay, we're like 2 or 3 people deep we've eliminated a lot of people, but we need to eliminate more people. And we need to basically do what was starting to be done, knocking out the civilian authority over the civilians to allow the Iranian people to rise up, to overthrow their government. Clearly, the government is still somewhat stronger than anyone really ever thought after this much bombing and stuff. They have proven more resilient than I thought. But it seems like in this case, further attacks are the only answer to get a bunch of people who are willing to speak in a realistic way, not people obsessed, an apocalyptic death cult who are obsessed with the 12th Imam. Because that's who you're dealing with. And clearly it's not working. And so how much longer can we, the good thing is that the blockade is working. Okay, so the blockade is working, and so that's good. The whole time they're slowly being strangled. But at the same time, the longer we wait, basically they will look for further attempts to humiliate President Trump. And that's not good from a long-term peace perspective.
Yeah, of course. And so if that's the guidance that you would advise for President Trump on Iran, what about Israel then? I mean, let's assume for the moment that the Axios piece is true. And also, President Trump posted on Truth Social, which then, of course, gets around to X, that he had a very productive call with Netanyahu of Israel. There will be no troops going to Beirut, and any troops that are on their way have already turned back. Likewise, I had through highly placed representatives, I had a very good call with Hezbollah, and they agreed that all the shooting will stop, that Israel will not attack them, and they will not attack Israel. So what about his perspective right now on basically advising and negotiating with Israel?
Well, I think that, look, Trump is a very clear-headed guy and a very good businessman. So he clearly understands that Netanyahu has an obligation to protect his own country as he has an obligation to protect the United States. So I don't think that even if there were words spoken between them, I don't think that that's anything to really worry about. I mean, he understands that Netanyahu has an obligation to protect the Israeli people. And certainly Israeli troops in Beirut is definitely, from a publicity standpoint, is not good, even though it may foster regional peace in more effectively. It's not a good look, I suppose, publicly. So they'll basically work on that together and, limit Israeli expansion into Lebanon, at least the public perception of it, and maybe the United States needs to do a little bit more to help the Lebanese army disarm Hezbollah, because if the Israelis we don't want the Israelis to do it, someone is going to have to do it, or else Hezbollah is going to remain a danger. So, and certainly if the war were restarted, so to speak, Israel, of course, wouldn't have any objection at all, because Israel is right there in their backyard and is obviously concerned about everything that's been going on, because, the problem with killing a snake is that when you make the decision to do it, you've got to do it. And if you wound the snake, then it's even more of a danger to you. And so, I think everyone is learning these lessons now. President Trump was willing to give them the benefit of the doubt in hopes of making a deal, but he's never dealt with a suicidal death cult before. And so that's what we're looking at, I think.
Yeah, and that definitely changes the equation. We're almost out of time, but what about public perception on this? Because it was just not that long ago that the peace deal was supposedly in the works. I think that is off the table completely, at least for now. But, is the White House gaining momentum in terms of buy-in from the base? I mean, it doesn't seem like it.
No, but I think, right. So I think it's better if, for instance, it would be certainly better from this point on, I think, if just let the blockade continue to strangle them, but stop tweeting and stop talking about imminent peace talks. Just maybe say nothing, because it's clear that progress hasn't been made in that area. And I think that the American people understand the people who are against the war or against Trump, anything he does. But I think that the war has been revealed that it was necessary to do this to prevent like nuclear holocaust in 3 years. And so I think the American people are willing to tolerate, higher gas prices and basically this blockade situation with Iran for a while. Because there really is no alternative.
But it depends on how long it is. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we're already out of time, Scott Uhlinger. I apologize for cutting you off here, but really appreciate your analysis. And it really depends on how long people have patience for this and how Trump handles it from here, I think. But you can follow Scott Uhlinger on X, and we will be right back with more.
When God allows something difficult in your life, you could look at it as his gift to you. Here's Nancy DeMoss-Wolgemuth.
If our way is perverse before God, what a mercy it is when God sets out to oppose us in that way.
God's way of getting your attention on the next Revive Our Hearts with Nancy DeMoss-Wolgemuth.
Tune in Saturdays at 1:30 Central for The Compass with host Rick Beggs and iVoter Guide President Debbie Wuthnow. Each weekend, The Compass will seek to navigate the public square with faith, truth, and conviction. Rick and Debbie will keep tabs on upcoming elections and remind us of the importance of our participation in them. The Compass reminds us that God is our true north. Be listening for The Compass, Saturday afternoons at 1:30 Central on American Family Radio.
What if healthcare could be more than bills and bureaucracy? What if it could reflect faith, foster community, and offer spiritual support? At Redeem HealthShare Ministry, the mission goes beyond medical bills. It's about honoring Christ and embracing healthcare that aligns with Christian values. Redeem members share medical expenses through monthly contributions, supporting one another in a Christ-centered community. It's not insurance, it's believers helping believers through financial support and prayer. And Redeem HealthShare provides freedom for members to select the doctors, hospitals, and treatments that are right for them. No networks, no restrictions, just faith-driven care. From everyday checkups to unexpected medical emergencies, Redeem offers flexible programs and encouragement rooted in Scripture. Because your healthcare should reflect your faith, not compromise it. More at redeemhealthshare.org.
This is Walker Wildman with AFR, and we're sending Bibles. Here's Michael with Bible League International.
Telling Bibleless believers no, that's one of the hardest things we do. We've spent the last few weeks telling you about the incredible move of God all over the world, and because of this, as many as 9 of 10 new believers in Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America are without Bibles. Would you remember Jong in Cambodia, a former Buddhist praying for a Bible? Rohan is in India, beaten when he came to Christ, but more than anything, he's praying for a Bible. And then Norris in the Middle East, radicals burned down her house, nearly killing her and her 4 daughters. But more than anything, she's praying for a Bible to raise them to know and love Jesus. AFR and Bible League want to bless 16,000 Bibleless believers by June 30th. You've done it for 8,000, praise the Lord. We've got 8,000 to go at $5 a Bible. $100 sends 20. $500 will bless 100 waiting believers. Walker?
Give generously at 800-YES-WORD, 800-YES-WORD, or visit sendbiblesnow.org. Sendbiblesnow.org.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. And there was a big evidentiary decision made in the Charlie Kirk assassination trial yesterday. So this is coming from the New York Post. New Charlie Kirk assassination evidence set to be made public at bombshell court hearing, judge rules. And so that is next month, where the suspect, his lawyers, the defendant's lawyers, sought to bar news cameras from the 5-day preliminary hearing set for July, where the prosecution is expected to lay out evidence against against the 23-year-old defendant. And so the preliminary hearing is basically to determine whether there is probable cause for the allegations and the indictment as it stands. And so the judge decides whether there's enough evidence to believe whether a crime was committed, and the defendant himself likely committed it. And so this process, which defendants can waive potentially strategically, really is almost like a mini trial, but it's now that this is actually going to be public, I think this becomes a more interesting question for the defense, whether they want to test the prosecution's evidence and witnesses, which is really what happens during a preliminary hearing like this, or whether they want to waive it so that the public doesn't get to see it and basically comment and maybe have their own opinions in the court of public opinion influenced before the actual trial. So with also my dog Todd weighing in on that and hopefully agreeing with me, I think he's agreeing more with the squirrel in the backyard. Let's welcome in Gerard Folletti, who is an attorney at the Lawfare Project. And Gerard, this is always an interesting question for the defense, whether they go to preliminary hearing or whether they waive it. Because the judge, I think rightly, is allowing cameras in the courtroom. The public should be able to access, all parts of this trial so that we're not hearing this just from reporters in the courtroom or third parties. Where do you think this stands in terms of what the defense might be thinking?
Well, I think the defense went up. Usually evidentiary hearings, these waiving of the preliminary hearings makes a lot of sense in cases where the prosecution has strong, direct evidence of tying the crime to the defendant. It makes little sense to be challenging that when the evidence is very clear. You want to be saving your best efforts for trial, and you already have a preview of what the government is going to put on. Usually you're saving your efforts for that. You don't waive it when you think you can make an impact, when you think that you actually do stand a likelihood of getting a dismissal on some of the charges or all of the charges. So this is going to be a very interesting tactical decision on the part of the defense. We know that there were potentially issues with the bullet fragments not matching the rifle that I think may have gotten more media attention a few weeks ago, but that is one reason why the defense might want to go ahead and challenge some of the evidence in order to raise those questions before the judge and get some things excluded. But ultimately, the public's interest in knowing about this, I think we saw the judge saying that the public will be able to see and watch these proceedings to know what's going on.
Yeah, and some of those exclusions could be brought up, later in pretrial motions and and some other things in terms of evidentiary exclusion. And so, what if any of the charges that Robinson is actually charged with may potentially be impacted, or to a degree, the defense is trying to lessen potentially if they actually went to preliminary hearing?
Well, I think that's the excellent question, and that is he has among the counts that are there, among the top counts, we don't think that anything will be successfully challenged. But there are things, for example, Tyler Robinson is being charged with 2 counts of witness tampering and obstruction of justice. These are things that might be more amenable to being challenged at an evidentiary hearing. These charges often get tacked on. These are not the main cause, obviously, of what he's being charged with. So it's charges like the witness tampering or obstruction of justice, even the commission of a violent offense in the presence of a child. These are the types of things that the defense might want to challenge before going forward towards pretrial practice.
Yeah, and so it's going to be really interesting to see their strategy. But in terms of cameras in the courtroom, which, as I've said, I fully agree with the judge, because this is probably the highest public interest trial that we have ongoing so far. I mean, I can't think of something that the public would be more interested in than a very public assassination of one of the top conservative commentators in the world, not just here in the United States. And so the judge said in his ruling that the defense hasn't shown that presenting evidence publicly and having the preliminary hearing, if they choose to go to it, in public and obviously with cameras, would deny Robinson a fair trial. And obviously those are issues that the defense will preserve on appeal, and all of that. That's just normal defense practice. But in terms of the issue of cameras in the courtroom, and I think that you're going to get a jury in Utah that, of course, will have heard of this case. What are the factors that go into something like that moving forward to the actual trial with trying to get a fair and impartial jury that likely the entire jury pool will have heard at least somewhat of this case?
Well, the presence of cameras or the everything that we've seen in the media so far, this is a very high-profile case, and this is not the first high-profile case that's ever been tried, whether in Utah or elsewhere. And you only have to think back to other very high-profile cases in New York. Mangione was a very high-profile case, is a very high-profile case, or go back into the 1990s and you see the O.J. Simpson case, which really set the standard for our expectations on media access to trials. And in all of these cases, ultimately, the lawyers have to do a good job with selecting the jury, with voir direing the jury, making sure that the jury is as impartial as possible. Because most murder crimes do get a substantial amount of reporting, and people are aware of them. So this makes it more important for lawyers to be on the top of their game when they're going through the jury selection process. But ultimately, that's an issue in many capital cases. This is hardly unique. So the public interest in knowing, especially because it was such a high-profile murder, a political murder, I think that outweighs the concerns that are typical in any higher-profile murder case.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And, obviously the defense will have to weigh, all of these decisions and then determine, whether they will actually go to preliminary hearing. If you're the prosecution and then if you're the defense, what are some of the strategic issues you would be contemplating on both sides of such a high profile case like this? Because if it goes to preliminary hearing, it's set for 5 days, which is probably standard in this, type of a murder case, but that's still a really long time for the public to be tuning in, paying attention, and actually seeing evidence and the prosecution's case well ahead of the actual trial.
Well, from the prosecution side, I think that the most important thing is that they be attuned and follow the rules, follow the procedure, follow the process, and be very careful in the comments that they make outside of the courtroom and even in court on camera that characterize the evidence or characterize motive or the statements that are made that go beyond what they can narrowly say that they can prove, because those types of statements can be then held against them. That's the type of thing that can result in a mistrial. That's the type of thing that can result in a transfer of venue, and that's not what you want when you are a prosecutor with a strong case. From the defense side, I think the concern is different. It's you don't want there to be too much out in the public that paints your client in a very negative light, that will make it difficult for a jury to be impartial. So you want to be judicious in your use of objections, but you also want to be sure that the prosecution follows the rules and doesn't go too far in painting by characterizing that evidence and characterizing your client.
Yeah, and then on the defense side, what are the concerns that they need to be focused on?
Well, they need to be focused on questioning the prosecution's evidence in a proper way and basically trying to punch holes in the prosecutor's theory, but also, again, without making grandiose claims. And in cases like this, look, the bullet fragments are the best example. You want to be able to poke holes in the prosecution's evidence, showing that it's not as reflected, that the prosecution can't make strong claims that, for example, the bullet conclusively matches the gun when there is evidence that it is not that conclusive. So that's the type of thing you want to highlight through testimony and cross-examination at a preliminary hearing. But again, you have to be careful not to go too far, because the evidence as presented, if you've gotten to this point and all the pretrial practice that you've had so far, and none of the charges have been dismissed, this is not likely to go in your favor as a defendant. So you want to follow the rules and preserve everything you can for appeal, poking those holes and then later arguing that the judge made potentially a wrong ruling and allow things to be said or the testimony to be made or evidence to be introduced that shouldn't have.
And, so if you, Gerard Filletti, are listening to all of the public commentary around this case, because, since it's such a high public interest case, I mean, everyone has their opinions. And, largely, I think most of the public has made up their mind even before, we all saw the video, but also we've seen, what's at least been reported to the public. I think it'll be even better when the public can see for themselves the evidence and the testimony of the witnesses that are presented by the prosecution, and also the defense, to then, kind of solidify their own perception and commentary on the case. But obviously the court of public opinion is very different than the actual court of law and the 12 jurors that would ultimately sit. But if you're listening to all of the public commentary around this case, what do you think that the biggest misconception people have about the preliminary hearing, or at least just the whole process of the preliminary hearing, actually proves or doesn't? Because I can see, if the defendant is bound over to after the preliminary hearing, then naturally people will say, okay, well, that's, the judge is indicating that he thinks he's guilty, and not actually focusing on what the hearing itself represents.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. That's the biggest misconception, is that any time we have a hearing, a lot of people think or assume that this is somehow dispositive, that this is somehow the ultimate outcome, that whatever the judge says is an indicator of how this case is going to turn out. So if the judge allows something into evidence, some people think, well, that means clearly that evidence is solid and legit, it's true, it's good, it's unimpeachable, and therefore he must be guilty. Or if the judge excludes something, that causes people to think, well, maybe he didn't do it at all. If there's one thing that's flawed in the presentation of evidence, that raises doubt about everything else. So there's a lot of people who think that this preliminary hearing, if he is bound held for trial, that this is an indicator that he's more likely than not guilty. But we have to remember that the legal system is not one and done. There are multiple parts to a trial, especially a criminal trial, and there are multiple opportunities for both sides to put on witnesses and challenge evidence. But ultimately, one of the biggest misconceptions, and this is a danger to the prosecution and defendants alike, is we live in an era of conspiracy. There keeps thinking or saying that this was something else, this was someone else killed him, someone was responsible for this is part of a wider conspiracy. That makes it harder both for Robinson to get a fair trial and for the prosecutor to get a conviction, which is why it's so important to have the transparency and have everything out in the open for the public.
Yeah, so well said. And I think that's the biggest piece that people should take away from this, is that this is part of the process. And, even though it may seem like, there are so many things that are being protected around the defense. And obviously most people, I think, listening to this program are on the side of wanting justice for Charlie Kirk, which, is a normal thing. And I think that is totally fair. What justice looks like in terms of the accused, Tyler Robinson, looks like affording him all due process that is constitutionally required. And then if the prosecution fulfills their burden of proof and the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt, then that is justice. And if they don't, then that as to the process is also justice. And so, we have to go through all of this in order to get to justice. And I think while there are, obviously in any system that's run by humans, there can be flaws, there can be things that we can improve. We do have overall, when it's not being weaponized, one of the best legal systems across human history, because we have those due process protections and we have that clash between the prosecution and the defense, and all of this that ultimately comes out at trial. But Gerard Filletti, looking for, in just the last couple of minutes I have with you, looking forward to the trial, then, what is in mind right now, as obviously everything that is done from both the prosecution and defense perspective from day one is building their case toward trial and toward jury selection ultimately. So what is the prosecution ultimately thinking about that? And sorry, we have about 30 seconds.
Well, the prosecution is thinking that apart from physical evidence, they really need to get into the motive and why he did it, and the statements that Tyler Robinson allegedly made, taking responsibility for it. Those are things that the prosecution needs to prove very clearly, on top of just the gun, the location, and pulling the trigger. They need to convince the jury that he actually had that motive and had that confession. So that's something the prosecution is still working on, I think, and that's we will see more at the preliminary hearing next month.
Yeah, well, we'll be following this story, of course. Like I said, this is the biggest public interest trial, I think, in this century. But also, apologies for the connection today. We are working on it. And as always, you can reach me and my team, Jenna, at afr.net.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
Getting married, starting a family,